Yes. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Jai Hind. On behalf of Team CASA, I, Lieutenant General Gautam Murthy, founder of CASA, wish you and your families a very happy and peaceful new year and welcome you to this hugely important and what promises to be an interesting discussion on the Russia-Ukraine war, the conflict and its global impact. This is CASA's 35th webinar and the first this year. Unmindful of our hopes for peace, the world is gripped with conflicts and tensions that are spread across continents. Amongst all the conflicts that dominated the headlines in 2022, none has occupied as much mind space as the Russia-Ukraine war, which has brought the Cold War, once thought dead and buried, to the brink of a hot war between Russia and the NATO countries, with Ukraine as a convenient proxy. Not one think tank or expert is willing to hazard a guess as to when this war will draw to a close or even how it will end. For end it must after both sides exhaust themselves. The spin-offs of this war are numerous and touches every country, more so India, which finds itself striking a delicate balance geopolitically speaking. To discuss this war and its impact, we have with us the author of this book, Colonel Ajay Singh, retired, who has put together this book, drawing on opinions and views of experts on various facets of this war. And he's in conversation with Major General Jagatbir Singh, VSM retired. Colonel Ajay is an alumnus of St. Xavier's College, Mumbai, where he graduated with honors in English literature. He joined the army in 1981 and during his career has commanded an armored regiment, held major staff and instructional appointments, and served in every part of the country and overseas. After his release from the army, he has authored 6 books: The Battles That Shaped Indian History, A Spectrum of Modern Warfare, Through Orphaned Eyes, a historical novel that covers the story of India and Pakistan, and India's Battlefields from Kurukshetra to Balakot, which covers 22 of the battles and has been hailed as the Bible of India's military history. His collection of short stories, The Final Draft, was awarded Rabindranath Tagore's International Award for Art and Literature in 2021. His latest book, Russia-Ukraine War, The Conflict and Its Global Impact, which is the subject of this discussion, was released in December 22. A known public speaker who appears frequently on television, he has written and co-hosted television series Rakt Rangjit and Pradhan Mantri for ABP News Channel. He conducts talks regularly at schools, colleges, military and civilian institutions on Indian warfare and contemporary events. He is happily married and based in Pune. We welcome Colonel Ajay Singh to this discussion and look forward to his analysis on the Russia-Ukraine war. Welcome, Ajay.
Thank you very much, sir, and thank you for such a lavish introduction. I'm looking forward to being part of the discussion today.
Okay, now the discussion you're going to have which we are all eagerly looking forward to, is with Major General Jagatbir Singh, who was commissioned into the 18th Cavalry in December 81, a regiment which he subsequently commanded. He is a second-generation army officer and is an alumnus of the prestigious Doon School, Dehradun, and the St. Stephen's College, Delhi. During his 38 years of service in the army, he has held various command, staff, and instructional appointments, served in various terrains across the country. He has also served in the United Nations peacekeeping missions as a military observer in Iraq and Kuwait in the period between the 2 Gulf Wars. Amongst his command appointments, he's commanded an armored regiment and armored brigade, where, as a part of the Desert Corps, where he was responsible for conversion of the brigade to Arjun tanks, and the prestigious 1st Armored Division as a part of the Strike Corps. He has also been posted to the Indian Military Academy in Dehradun as a platoon commander and served as 2 tenures there, one as an instructor and one as a senior instructor in the Defense Services Staff College, Wellington. He's also served in the Military Secretary branch and has been a director in the Tri-Services Institutes at the headquarters of the IDS. He retired in February 2018 as the DDG resettlement, and post-retirement he worked as a Chief Operations Officer of a manufacturing company dealing with the export of high technology machines for manufacturing of filters. He writes on defense matters and has reviewed many books, including this one, I've enjoyed reading his reviews on all the reviews that he's written. Welcome, General Jagatbir, and look forward to your discussion with Colonel Ajay Singh.
Thank you very much, sir, and Jai Hind to
Jai
you, sir. And I'm indeed grateful to you for such a wonderful introduction. It's difficult to live up to what you've said.
No.
But
we look forward to this discussion. And over to you, Jagatbir. The floor is all yours.
Thank
you.
you.
And Colonel Ajay Singh. And I'm switching off my video feed, but I will be able to hear you all.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Jai Hind and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I'd like to thank Lieutenant General Gautam Murthy for his very kind words and all this opportunity, giving us both Ajay and me this opportunity for the conflict and its global impact. It's indeed an honor and privilege for both of us to be here on this platform. And at the outset, I wish all members of CASA a wonderful 2023. May it be filled with joy and happiness. Ajay and I are cosmates, so it's going to be a little easy for us to carry out this discussion. We've known each other for a long time, right from the time we joined IMA. I think that was in 1980. And so we've had many postings together also. So it'll be a wonderful engagement with Ajay. I've enjoyed all his books. I've read all 6 of his books. There's the 6th book. I've read all of them and read a lot of his articles. I'm sure all the many members of CASA would have also read these books. Now, the Russian-Ukraine war, the conflict and its global impact has been meticulously researched and impeccably presented. Is a detailed analysis of the war. It's an in-depth account of the background of the war and its implications on India and the world. It seamlessly weaves together all the facets of the war. As has been spoken by General Murthy, the Ukraine conflict is a watershed moment. This is considered, it is the first major war in Europe after World War II. The Cold War never saw, any physical exchange between that time the Soviet bloc and the NATO forces. And it's come at a time where we talk of, the world having to face certain strategic shocks, and India in particular having to face these strategic shocks, which started off with COVID in 2020. And then you had the incident in Galwan and the, issue of the US vacating Afghanistan, giving a sort of turmoil in our region. And in 2022, 24th February 2022, we saw the Russians against, as General Gautam Murthy had mentioned, nobody expected Putin to actually invade Ukraine at that time. What were the reasons for this? Why, he did it? Where are we today? It's, you can say, akin to a boxing bout where two, adversaries have retreated into their corner, forced by the referee, which in this case is the winter, but yet they continue to find windows of opportunity to engage each other by, indirect means, that is precision-guided weapons, causing huge amount of casualties on infrastructure as well as on military assets. Like you had the recent attack on New Year's Eve where 89 Russian soldiers were killed. So there are many things to study about this conflict. What's going on? What went wrong? What is the future? How will it end? I mean, the questions are endless. Henry Kissinger has been quoted by Ajay in his book as saying that, gave a warning to the West that NATO's expansion and a disregard for Russian concerns would create a backlash. So is this the backlash that we are saying? People have always talked about, short wars being the norm, physical conflict being avoided, but all these have been thrown out of the window in this case. And Ajay has very rightly, talked, his first words in the book are, Mars, the god of war, may his shadow never fall on the earth. So that's how Ajay, what Ajay mentions in his book. So to start with, I'll ask Ajay, question which everyone read the book, and more importantly, with the conflict ongoing, where did he draw the line, or was he visualizing an end to the conflict when he started writing? And where should this line have been drawn when he said, "This is it"? And how come you decided to write the book? The timing of this book, and what forced you to drove you to write the book? Over to
Thanks,
you, Ajay.
Jagat. Thank you very much. And yes, you're right. I mean, what was the biggest challenge for me was where do we start the book, but where do we stop it? For example, when we started doing the book, at that time, it, like everybody else, one imagined that the war is going to be over in 2 weeks' time, 3 weeks' time, a month at the most. Even when the war was going on, I remember I was reading a series of articles, and around April, I thought, let me put it all in the form of a book, which will come around in September when the war would have been conveniently over. September came and went, the Ukraine offensive came, and I had to write and rewrite the book repeatedly. Because the lessons changed from the Russian victory, it became a Ukraine very good counteroffensive. Then things came to a pause out there. I was very fortunate. I had a publisher who was very supportive. And we both were going almost in tandem, writing the book, giving him the chapters, adding on to it as the things went on. And we spoke to a lot of people. And the conclusion which we came to was this war is going nowhere. It is in many ways like the Second World War, in which I had a lot of parallels with the Second World War in this book as well, which continued for 4 years. Offensives, counteroffensive, halts, pauses, periods of pause, periods of intensive activity. So we decided to give it the timeline of 15th November, then we'd halt the situations in this thing. Luckily for us, that happened to be the time when the Ukrainian counteroffensive had also run its course. Now, with a temporary pause going on in winter, we are consolidated. I would say they are consolidated, not we, but we've paused our writing out here. And perhaps when the next phase begins, we can add subsequent chapters to the book.
So we look forward to a sequel.
Not a sequel. Let me say addition to one chapter. Writing a book was a pain. Writing a sequel is going to be too much. But there's one thing I must say, Jagat, what has made this so easy, or rather comparatively easier, has been the fact that I have not done it alone. We've been very fortunate to have a panel of excellent writers, you amongst them, who wrote the piece on NATO. We've got Commodore Ajay Singh, who wrote the naval aspects, General Raj Shukla, who wrote the impact on India, Air Marshal Anil Chopra, who got a beautiful analysis of the air aspects, General Shankar, who brought out artillery, the god of war. And we also had a Western viewpoint from a friend of mine called Jason Hall, who is a reporter in London, with Captain Alok Bansal talking about the global implications of the war. So, with a panel like these, what finally came out in the book was not only the war per se, but a detailed examination of all its facets.
Yeah, that's what I highlighted when I said, this book gives a holistic view of what all has happened and how it's happened. But while reading the book, initially a lot of people feel that you have a sympathetic view of Russia's security concerns that led to the war. In fact, you mentioned Ukraine joining NATO and the mercurial personality of Putin were the two issues that led to the war. This is in your,
Yes.
the first chapter. Yeah. So can you tell the viewers a little bit about the backdrop, especially Russia's fears of the NATO and the reasons that, in your view, have led to this conflict, which has literally, impacted the world in more ways than one?
Jagat, for the history of Russia and Ukraine has been a conjoined history. In many ways, it's the history of India and Pakistan. We were conjoined for decades, but when Pakistan split, it was accepted. In the Russian psyche, I feel that the division, the moving away of Ukraine, of which they were together as part of the Soviet Union for 70 years, was never really accepted by them because they were bound so much by culture and tradition. In fact, Kyiv was the center of the Kievan Rus empire, which encompassed Belarusia, Russia, Ukraine, and the other neighboring states. So when Ukraine moved away from the Russian orbit from the Soviet orbit, and Russia and Ukraine became independent states, they remained together, with Ukraine tilting towards Russia. The drift away from Russia came about sometime in the early part of this millennia, when they tilted toward the European Union. And a pro-Russian prime minister was forcibly evicted from there. This set into motion a series of events called the Euromaidan protests. Now, things came to a pass actually in 2014, when these pro and Russian protests spread across the entire country. Remember, Ukraine had a lot of Russian-speaking people. In the Donbas region and in the Crimea, pro-Russian separatists took over the parliament building in the Crimea. They increased the activities in Donbas, which Russia used as a pretext to actually go and annex Crimea and start a separatist movement in the Donbas, which has gone on for 10 years right now. That's been going on. I would say the war has been going on in 2014. But the trigger came about when Ukraine decided and had it enshrined in its constitution that they would join NATO. This was in 2019, after Zelensky had taken over. This was the crossing of a red line, which Putin, like you brought out, with a mercurial personality, with a very staunch pro-Soviet and pro-Russia imperialistic feelings, could not accept. They began talks to get them to withdraw it, to remove it from the constitution. Talks were unsuccessful, and most probably during the conversations, in closed doors, they would have agreed to the fact that Ukraine will not join NATO. Remember, they didn't give them membership after all. But Putin demanded written guarantees. And I don't blame him for that, because NATO had broken promises made to the Soviet Union since 1990, when they said that we will not expand 1 inch eastward, and then proceeded to advance 1,000 kilometers towards Russia. Had Ukraine joined it, remember it, as Putin brought it himself, don't they say it? If NATO comes to Ukraine, their missiles can hit Moscow in 3 to 4 minutes. We have nowhere further to go behind. And the parallel I often draw is, assuming Nepal gets into China's orbit and agrees to station Chinese missiles and troops on their soil, we will not attack. We are a peace-loving nation, but wouldn't it be a very severe threat to our security that we would take measures to counter?
Yeah, thank you, Ajay. That's very well covered. You're absolutely right about the link. Some of the top Soviet leadership also owed their origins to Ukraine, like Khrushchev and Brezhnev belonged to Ukraine, and yes, Gorbachev's mother was from there. So, I mean, it's very close linkages. But, let's get on with the next question. And that is about the war itself. The invasion, you said, was a miscalculation, and the Russian plan was too ambitious. So you talked of it. On the face of it, it was expected that the Russian army would sweep Ukraine. That's what you said in your chapter. And then you've gone on to compare the defense budget, which was all Russo-Ukrainian, which is 10 times more, 61.7 billion versus 5.9 billion. And, the various arms. And then you've also, and services, and then you've also talked about the fact that Ukraine was isolated and alone, but it had the defender's advantage. And Russia tried to emulate the German offensive of 1941, but their thrust lines were widely separated. Logistics was a problem. And you beautifully put across the way President Zelensky of Ukraine reacted. People viewed him as somebody else, but he actually has risen to the occasion. And when he was offered a ride out. He said, I don't need a ride, but I need ammunition, which is so different from what we saw as far as President Ghani was concerned in Afghanistan. So can you tell us a little bit more about this invasion and the miscalculation?
Yes. That's why I deliberately put this map. I hope you can all see it. Jagat, can you see the map?
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah.
Okay, if you take a look at it these are the thrust lines which they represent, and on ground, it is 2,400 kilometers. That's a tremendous distance. These 4 thrust lines, they're actually 3, you could call it 3, the northern, the northeastern, another north, and the southern one. Each of them had independent commanders. There were no central commanders in the initial days itself. Now, as a military man, you have one look at it and you realize that they are so widely separated that command, control, coordination are all going to be very, very difficult. And I feel the mistake the Russians made was in the fact of having too ambitious a scale of a plan. Had they only stuck to maybe the south and the northeast, where they eventually homed on to, they might have had greater success. By dispersing along this frontage, perhaps with the knowledge, or rather with the feeling that Ukraine will capitulate within 2 weeks, is what made them overstretch. The general feeling is that Putin's generals had given him the wrong sense of confidence in the fact that, like he took over Georgia in 8 days, they'll be able to take over Ukraine in 2 weeks as well. So the scale of the resistance quite took them by surprise. That is why I feel it was a miscalculation, both militarily and politically by Putin, which rebounded very, very badly.
Yeah, thank you, Ajay. That's beautifully put across. The next thing is, let's zero in onto the Battle of Kyiv, which you've talked about. You called it a brilliant and audacious operation that could have decided the war in the first week itself, had it succeeded.
Yes.
But at the same time, you talk about a line. You said, then inexplicably the 64-kilometer long column stopped. Was that a turning point? Can you tell us something about this? Would it be difficult, as you hinted in the book, that it's so many square kilometers to isolate it, capture it, built up areas, 800 square kilometers, it's not a viable objective. So what were they expecting? Were they expecting the government to capitulate?
See, Jagat, if you take a look at where the capture of Kyiv would be akin to the capture of Moscow by the Germans in 1941. It is a nerve center. And the Russian plan to take over Kyiv, like I said, though it made extending the front line, the line so much, was actually a very brilliant plan. 4 o'clock, the operations began. I beg your pardon, 5 o'clock, the operations began. At 8 o'clock in the morning, on the 24th of February, the first Mi-17 helicopters approached near Kyiv. They came towards Antonov airfield, and that's at the place at Hostomel, just 25 kilometers away from Kyiv, to capture that airfield intact. The aim of that operation was, this was a pathfinder force. They would take over the airfield, and the main force coming in the IL-76s would land up there. They would move in conjunction with the ground forces towards Kyiv, take it over rapidly, capture Zelensky and the leadership, and that would be the end of the story. And to give you an idea as to how close it came to succeeding was, when the operation began, that is the time when the US offered Zelensky a ride to take him away from his capital. Because even they anticipated that they're so close that he is at a danger of losing his life or being captured at most. The operation, Hostomel airfield, changed hands 3 times in 2 days. And the only reason why they managed to push the Russians out at great cost was because the 4th Rapid Reaction Brigade in Kyiv itself, remember, they didn't have reserve. Something like the line of the territorial army forces were lying out there, hastily cobbled together, launched the attack on the airfield, and prevented the Russians from establishing an airhead out there.
Yeah, they were apparently fed this intelligence by somebody.
Yes. But this is what, that's only one ace. The second ace was the land assault.
Yeah.
So if you take a look at land assault, I would look at the map. We are armored corps, we know the investment, how difficult to invest a city of this caliber, of this size. The thrust from Belarus, if you look at this is the Dnieper River flowing through Kyiv. You can see it on the map. One thrust came to the west of the river, the main thrust, moving from Belarus. The other thrust came from the northeast, which had to break through the towns of Chernihiv and Sumy to invest Kyiv from the east of the river. Now, we have a lot of talk about that 64-kilometer convoy, which I
thank you.
dramatically. It stopped. But it did not stop because it ran out of fuel. It had stopped because the thrust on the northeast was blocked because of this resistance in the cities. So isolating that city would have been difficult. That 7 days of delay is what prevented the isolation of Kyiv. And after that, I think they did the operationally sensible move by withdrawing. They would never be able to capture a city of that size thereafter.
Thanks, Ajay. That was wonderfully put across. But when the Battle of Kyiv did not go the way the Russians hoped, what were their gains in the other sectors, especially in the south and the east? What happened there? Can you tell the viewers a bit about that?
Okay. Let's divide the campaign into phases. The first phase was, let me call it the northern thrust, the Battle of Kyiv. Now, when the second phase began, when the Russians withdrew from Kyiv, they freed the 40,000 odd troops who were out there, and they focused on what they called the original aims of the campaign, the Donbass. That is the two regions of Luhansk and Donetsk. And in the south, let me go back to the map. Okay, this is the map, these are the thrust lines. In the south, on the Crimea, where the Russians already had a large presence, they had advanced from the Crimea towards the southern provinces of Kherson and Zaporizhia. Both these offensives actually made a lot of progress. You take a look at it, Zaporizhia is 200 kilometers deep. They had captured over the southern thrust line made tremendous success. By around June or July, they had taken over both the provinces.
Yeah, the nuclear plant in Zaporizhia was one of the places which was threatened, and there's a lot of thing in this discussion in the media about the danger of that.
Yes, we'll come to that later on. The danger still exists.
Yeah.
And in the Donbass, they had more difficult going, because remember, the Donbass, if you take a look at it, that is where fighting has been going on since 2014. The best troops of the Ukrainian army is fighting out there. And they have a line of LOC flowing through it, a line of contact. Those battle-hardened formations held the Russians back till they were forced to move in slow attrition, grinding movement forward. But by around end August, if you take a look at, they've taken almost 90% of the Donbass and most of Zaporizhia and Kherson. Okay. This, translating it into terms which we can visualize, is 20% of Ukrainians' prime territory. In India, assuming an attacker had taken the states of Punjab, Rajasthan, Gujarat, and parts of Maharashtra right up to Mumbai, this would be the kind of scale of territorial losses that would have been incurred. So I feel, though slow, the Russian territorial gain, 20% of a nation, which was the second largest country in Europe, is, I wouldn't call it commendable, but yes, it is a large scale.
No, it is a large amount of territory that has been captured. And now, of course, there's referendums held there and they're integrating it into Russia. So that's a different topic altogether. But, you said that the units were depleted. They held a ragged front line of 1,200 kilometers that could explode at any minute. And now we've seen the counter-offensive coming in. So when the Ukrainian counter-offensive came about in the south and northeast, did it really mark a turning point in a way, as has been claimed?
Yeah. You know, Jagat, the counter-offensive which came about from September to November, let me call it the third phase of the war. The Ukrainian counter, and yes, it was a turning point. It was I look at this way, Kyiv was not a defeat for the Russians. It was an operational withdrawal. Even when they moved away from Kharkiv, sometime in August, yes, that was almost that was a strategic withdrawal. But this Ukrainian offensive, both in the northeast region towards Kharkiv and in the south, was brilliantly executed. And for the first time, it made a difference because for the first time, people began realizing that Ukraine can win this war. And it was quite a brilliant topic. It was something like, you study the 1940, the 39 battle, when the Germans went into France, they had got their main thrust moving from the north and a secondary thrust, if you may call it that, moving to the Ardennes. And a lot of noise was made in the northern thrust, while the thrust of the Ardennes came in almost silently.
Yeah, I remember you.
The Matador escaped.
Giving a press on the Battle of Ardennes in long time ago.
Called it a very noisy thrust, right? Now you must see, as students of history, this operation was superb. Firstly, the Ukrainians made a lot of song and dance in the south. They were attacking. They said they're going to Kherson. All that was happening in the month of October, or August, end August, September, October. Okay. Now, they didn't make much progress. Because on the 29th of August, can you imagine, Zelensky announces on his social media blog that we are restarting our southern offensive again. The southern headquarters, or the headquarters of the Southern Command, looking after this thrust, says we are going to relaunch the operation in the south again. This fooled the Russians sufficiently to pull out their troops from the northeastern region and reinforce the south. And when the line was weakened, they launched the operation in Kharkiv. The southern thrust, the action in the south in the month of August and September were what I call the Matador escape, drawing the Russians.
Yeah, you talked about that.
Yes. And when they launched their blitzkrieg in Kharkiv, it was actually a very good operation. They had hidden the equivalent of 3 armored brigades in thick forests. They had drawn the Russians to the south. And when they launched their attacks, they literally went through the towns of Balaklia, Izium, Kupiansk. They bypassed them in the classical mechanized fashion till they reached the line of the Oskil River, cutting off the Russians behind that line. That shock, panic, and that awe. The area we had captured was up to the line of this river line, right? But they recaptured a lot of logistic nodes. The significance of this, if you take a look at it, Jagat, they had captured around 6,000 square kilometers, but it was the speed with which they captured it. That was important. The other important part was it gave them bridgeheads across the river from which it could threaten the entire positions in the Donbass. So this put the shoe quite squarely on the other foot again. And as you know, once Kharkiv, this operation made a success, they relaunched their operation in the south towards Kharkiv. I beg your pardon, towards Kherson, which they captured virtually without a fight. Again, the tactics they use, can you see that bluish line going down? That is the 2 kilometer wide Dnieper River. The tactics that followed out here was west of the river, an entire armored brigade virtually moved down the river line from north to south, cutting off all the Russians who were on the west of the river and forcing them to withdraw across. So they have captured the area up to Kharkiv. Today, where we stand is I would put it like this. In the south, up to the Dnieper River line, they have occupied, the Ukrainians have retaken. In the northeast, up to the Oskil River, they have taken the positions. They have recaptured around 6,000 to 8,000 square kilometers of territory. But the Russians still hold on to almost 2 lakh square kilometers of Ukrainian soil. So,
Yeah, thanks, Ajay.
where we stand now.
Okay. So exactly, I was coming to where we stand today, because the Ukrainian counteroffensive seems to have changed the perception of the Ukrainian army. So now with coming on to what your slide says, so where does the war stand today? What are the options? As I said, the winter having forced a retreat of two adversaries, but they're engaging each other not physically, but by indirect weapons. Concentrating on that, there will be skirmishes, but any major offensive during this period is almost ruled out due to the problems of operating inside. So where are we today? Ask you this.
Okay. Today, if you take a look at the
where does the war stand today? What are the martial winter having? Yeah.
Today, I would say in the south, the front has stabilized around the Dnieper River line. In the northeast, Russia is launching its offensive. If you take a look at it, Bakhmut is the area they're going towards. But it is not that major scale offensive. They are building up the reserves. The conscripts have been trained. I believe they've started joining in the ranks as well. So they're beefing up their front lines out there. And now, from most sources, as you know, we get the news from the different sources. Well, from most sources, Russia is, I'm underlining the word, definitely preparing for an offensive in the coming season, which could be anything. It could be in end January when they take advantage of the fact that the ground is absolutely solid and frozen. Or it could be even beyond that. But the Russians are known when their backs are to the wall. Remember the Battle of Moscow, the Battle of Stalingrad. When their backs are to the wall, they scrounge the depths of the reserves, launch an offensive, which very often succeeds in turning the tables. Now, should they decide to launch one more offensive, I also notice a lot of political activity between Putin and Belarus. If you notice, Putin was in Belarus just last week. And once again, a division of Russian soldiers have been sent to Belarus to exercise.
Yeah, that's there. But let's come on to your next chapter, since you've hinted at Belarus. So you've talked of certain, in chapter 3, you've built up certain scenarios. What all are there? Russian victory, Ukrainian victory.
Right.
And then you've talked of something which you call an interminable frozen conflict,
Yes.
And so can you tell us some, and of course, then you've talked of, spreading it and World War III. So where could it end here? Where do we stand?
Okay, in fact, where could it end, Jagatbir? It is a question I do not think anybody really could be able to answer that accurately. So I'm going to give you scenarios of the likely end. Okay, one is, let's put it this way. One scenario is a Russian victory. The Russian victories would be in which they take control of the territory they've occupied, consolidate along the line, and that is the end of the story. Ukraine agrees to peace on their terms. The other is a Ukrainian victory, in which the Ukrainian counteroffensive, beefed up with Russian equipment and weaponry and training and aid, manages to push the Russians out across the entire area they've occupied, perhaps even including Crimea.
Yeah, I was coming to
perhaps even including Crimea. I'm talking about a scenario. And it is a complete Ukrainian victory. Of course, Putin is in disgrace, out of political power, the works that follow after that. The other more likely scenario is both lines consolidate along the areas they occupy right now. The Dnieper River, perhaps in the south, and maybe the Donetsk River in the northeast. Along this war, a permanent state along this line, a permanent state of no war, no peace continues. Remember, in 2014, when the insurgency went on in the Donbass, the Russian separatists had occupied a vast chunk of Luhansk and Donetsk, and the line dividing them and the Ukrainian troops was called the LOC, the line of contact, which, like the LOC of India and Pakistan, simmered on for years. Do we see this line of contact having moved westwards from the Donbass towards the Dnieper River and the Don River in Ukraine? Very likely, very, very likely. This state of frozen conflict could be a very likely state, maybe not permanent, perhaps even permanently, but definitely for some time to come.
Yeah, because there's division within the people also. There's Russian speaking, Ukrainian speaking,
Yes.
Protestants one side,
Yes,
and
yes.
the Greek the Orthodox Church the other side. So there have been differences, and people have been hopping on these and playing these up, the so-called fault lines. But let's come on to something else, which is more up your street and my street, and that is mechanized operations.
Oh,
and there's been a lot
yes.
about it. People have talked about the demise of the tank, which we've staunchly refuted. But the issue comes up about the tank versus the anti-tank weapons, and they're saying that the gap is widening. And we've not seen any of the Russian T-14s there, Armatas in use, but also we've seen that the use of armor, in spite of having so much training in the Soviet manner, having fought World War II, having come through everything, being schooled in with thought processes of people like Tukhachevsky and in maneuver warfare. They talked in the Soviet time of the OMG, the Operation Maneuver Group. None of that seems to have translated on ground, and you've seen drills not being followed correctly. So is that more attributable to the demise of the tank, or these javelins and precision guided weapons contributing to that? Who's the lead actor in this conflict as far as weaponry is concerned?
See, Jagat, as far as I would not let's call it a demise of the tank. Let's call it a utilization of the tank.
Yeah, that's a better way of putting it.
Now let me, and yes, one thing again, like you and me and everybody else in the audience, we get the information from the videos and the open source information comes our way.
Yeah, a lot of them are doctored videos. They're not correct. There's some video games,
Yes, yes. But if you take a look at, after having gone through so many, and if you see it, even as a military person, you can see that some of the basic tenets were not followed. Most of the tank ambushes were because the tanks were along the road. Because remember, they launched that offensive on the 24th of Feb, when General Mud has come in now. Martial winter is gone, but now the ground snow is melting.
Boggy terrain.
Boggy ground. It is martial mud. The tanks could not move cross country. The best attribute of a tank is that they were road bound. Even when they were road bound, also, when they are road bound, they had to clear the cities. And they were sucked into tank ambush after tank ambush, because their mobility was not utilized. The other very important thing is the fact that the Ukrainians definitely used anti-tank weaponry beautifully. The manner in which they amalgamated everything, for example, drones. Do you know drones were taken from pizza delivery huts? The pizza delivery boys who were delivering pizzas by drones became the drone operators. These drones were fitted with cameras to fly. They would relay the information of enemy coming. A strike drone would hit from the side, strike an ammunition, launch a missile, get away. Repeated tank ambushes like this, and also the javelin, the top attack munitions, proved to be extremely effective. But is it the demise of the tank? No. Because look at it this way, for them to have moved over 200 kilometers deep along a front almost 1,600 kilometers long, in most cases, the advance was spearheaded by the mechanized forces.
Yeah,
Had they used it better, yeah, it would have better results. And if you
that
won't
is
have,
there.
no, and if you won't have the use of, on the other side, when the Ukrainians launched the Kharkiv offensive, they did the classical mechanized operations. Like I said, they
Yeah,
consumed
that is
three
there.
brigades. They consumed 3 brigades, and when they moved in, they came in, just like they teach us in the writes in the bio days, encircled the different towns they had to, the initial objectives. Mechanized infantry, in fact, the BMP has turned out to be the most effective weapon of this war. Cleared the town, the tanks were relieved, moved to the next objective, let the infantry mop up, move to the depth line. In 3 days, they just moved up to the line of the river and they halted. That speed which we talk about was utilized there.
Yeah, General Shankar has written a wonderful piece in your book, The God of War, firepower in the Ukraine conflict. He's
Yes.
gone into great detail in this. And he talks about, the future wars, the way they'll be fought. And he's saying firepower is going to have an out of proportion impact on the battlefield. So can you tell us something about the impact of firepower? And we've seen it recently, precision-guided weapons targeting Russian soldiers, 89 killed. And, can you tell us something? Yeah.
Well, definitely. No doubt, artillery has more than proved its own, not only in this war, every war. Our own war, Kargil, artillery, that's won the day for us eventually. And that is going to hold good. Even the Russian advances in the northeast and the south were all based on artillery fires. The Ukrainian successes have been based on artillery, but there's a slight difference. Rather than going for that massive pounding and heavy bombardments that the Russians have resorted to, they are resorting to more long-range precision strikes. Easier on ammunition, everything. It is these precision attacks, coupled with, of course, superb intelligence inputs from the USA, which has led to the destruction, to the killings of so many headquarters, ammunition dumps, and now even that airfield, I think Sati airfield, deep in the Crimea. These strikes have proved that long-range precision munition and artillery is definitely the need of the hour.
Yeah, okay, quickly, Ajay, we'll have to go a little faster now. Air Marshal Chopra has written a wonderful piece about the air battle. So do you think everybody expected total dominance of the airspace by the Russians? What happened there? Why do we see a lack of, use of the Russian Air Force, so to put it?
This has been one of the mysteries. In fact, if you take a look at the heading which I've given that chapter is, but where is the Russian Air Force? One expected that one of the first moves would be to dominate the Ukrainian skies. They never did it, even though they had an overwhelming superiority of aircraft, 400 aircraft versus 175 Ukrainian aircraft. They were unable to support them in the ground operations. Perhaps one of the reasons is what they bought out is the Russian equipment and the Russian Air Force was not as much as what it was hyped out to be. But even the basic tenets of, say, the use of attack helicopters with tanks and things like that have not been followed. Why? At a later juncture, when the Ukrainians were equipped with handheld surface-to-air missiles, even the ground attacks, the Sukhoi 25s, were unable to support their own troops because they could not control the skies. And on the ground, the Ukrainians were able to shoot them down with their stingers. So the failure of the Russian Air Force has been one of the greatest mysteries, which may come about later on in the war.
Okay, the next question I have is, regarding the maritime domain. Commodore Anil Jai Singh, I wonder if he's here, has written a wonderful piece, and he talks about the necessity of Russia having to control the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. So I wonder if he's there. Would he like to answer with you? Okay, Ajay, you can take it on.
Okay, I wish he had been there. He would be the right person to have done that. But he's right in one thing. Sorry. You see, if you take a look at the Black Sea, according to Commodore Ajay Singh, the entire thing was over control of the Black Sea. And by the Russians having dominated the Black Sea so completely in the manner in which they did, by taking over the entire coastline, it has given them access from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean and onto the Atlantic. As per him, it was these maritime aspects which determined the war more than the naval, more than the land aspects as well. And I tend to agree with him, because if you take a look at it, once they gained control of the coastline and the Black Sea, they were able to strangulate Ukraine by preventing the export of its grain. In other words, by controlling the sea, they can strangulate Ukraine economically and bring it to its knees.
Yeah.
Much more than they'd ever be able to do in any land operation.
Okay, Ajay, thanks for that. Now, before I go on to some other questions, I have there, 3 questions by Lieutenant General Harbhajan Singh, who was the former SONC, and he belongs to first course of NDA, that is the erstwhile JSW, the first course of JSW. So his first question is, what are the chances of a Russian thrust from Belarus and north towards Kyiv, since the focus is towards the east and the south? Then he talks about a thrust towards Lviv, since there's almost a stalemate in the east and the south. And he also wants you to discuss issues regarding command and control. Is there now a single commander? All the 3 services fight. There has been a change of command as far as the Russian forces are concerned. And you've got a new commander in General Sergei Surovikin. Yes. So, I mean, what is this?
Okay. As far as the thrust going
tell us something about that?
Towards Kyiv, I would put a renewed thrust to be a very distinct possibility. Because it is, I would put it this way, it's a low-cost option. With the troops being already in Belarus, like they were earlier on in February 22, a thrust line towards Kyiv will automatically reduce pressure both in the south and the northeast, forcing the Ukrainians to withdraw pullback troops and halt their own offensive actions out there. They need not attack the town. I don't think they want the aim of capturing or killing Zelensky no longer exists now. They cannot do it at this stage. But even a threat to Kyiv will withdraw so many troops that they will be able to push ahead both in the south and in the east as well. As far as Lviv goes, sir, I have my doubts, because it is so much in the west that the Russians will not be able to reach that distance on land. And if they do reach it, they are leaving themselves open to being cut off. So remember, Lviv is just 20 kilometers on the Polish border. So it is the place where the entire transshipment of NATO weapons comes in. They will continue striking it with long-range missiles, but I doubt if they'll be able to make a land thrust onto it. Nicer, it is too far and way beyond the operational reach. And lastly, as far as the command and control goes, yes, the biggest drawback which they had was in the initial days, all thrust lines were moving independently. When they got a single commander who took over sometime in March, he was the one who stopped the thrust on Kyiv and had a concentrated assault in the south, the east, and the northeast. Even now, they have one single commander, but from what one gathers is the traditional and hierarchy-bound Russian system is not allows for too much centralizations at the upper levels, which is one of the reasons why I would say the tactical operations have really not been up to scratch.
Okay, Ajay, there's one more question from Bakul Upadhyay, and that is, what is the role of UCAVs in the war, and how should it influence India's future strategy, both for the Indian Army and the Indian Air Force?
You know, today there was a beautiful article in the Times of India which says that drones is the future of warfare. And very honestly, let's say drones are going to lead to a generation of robotic killers, as they call it. And I strongly tend to agree that the future of warfare lies in unmanned vehicles, both land, air, and maritime vehicles. Drones have shown what an effective low-cost option it can be. A drone flown by a pizza operator can be fitted with a camera to detect a massive thrust line. A drone, a suicide drone costing $50,000 can smash into a $2 million tank and destroy it in smithereens. You can use unmanned vehicles. Look at the technology, look at what can be done. You park a tracked unmanned vehicle, which can be remotely controlled maybe 20 kilometers away, leave it out there with this camera, which can be activated at will, let it follow, move along tracks which you give it. How much of information will you be able to get? Even in the terms of maritime vehicles, I believe the USA has recently developed an unmanned vehicle which has been able to circumvent the globe. So yes, I feel drones and unmanned vehicles is in many ways going to be the most potent weapon of war in the next 20, 30 years or so.
Okay, Ajay. Brigadier Agarwal has a question. Likely role of Transnistria in the Russian scheme of things. What is your view on that?
Yes, yeah. So I think Transnistria now, okay, let me explain to you. You can see the map where Odessa is written, right? To the northwest of it lies Moldova. That is the province of Transnistria. Now, Transnistria is something like the Donetsk and the Donbass, which has a large Russian-speaking minority, or rather, a large Russian-speaking population. As per some indicators, the Russian plan was to take over Kherson, take over Odessa, and then move towards Moldova, towards Transnistria. Look at what they would have got, an entire arc across the entire sea line, which should be composed of so-called Russian-speaking people, which should be theirs. But now, I think it is beyond their capabilities. I do not think they can push their thrust beyond Kherson anymore. Or if they do, it will be exorbitantly expensive and too time-consuming. So Transnistria, I think, at this point of time, no, I do not think they'll be able to reactivate the thrust out there.
Okay, Ajay, two quick questions. A lot of people talk about India's stance during this conflict. Can you just throw some light on that? And the second, on India's stance during this conflict. A lot of people are accusing us of, supporting Russia, being neutral.
Yes. Well, let me put it this way. I would put India's stance...
buying oil. So what do you think India's stance is there? And next thing is, are sanctions toothless or do sanctions work?
Well, let me put it this way. If you ask me, India's handling of the situation and our stance, which is based completely on national interests, I would rank it 12 out of 10. We have to take a hat off to our external affairs minister and our prime minister for making it very clear that our stance is independent. We do not support violence. We do not support conflict, but we shall still do what is the best for the Indian people. The import of Russian oil, buying it at rates around $77 per barrel, when the current rate was going up about 89 or so, was such a saving to the Indian economy. Secondly, we have condemned the violence and the war. At the same time, we have offered to be the broker to broker peace. And by the very fact that Modi is one of the few, if not the only, world leaders who has got access to both Zelensky and Putin. Both sides, if you take a look at the Russian peace initiative, both approached him, with Zelensky especially requesting him to support his 10-point peace plan, which he had worked out. India's stance has been correct. By holding our own this way, not alienating any of them, we will actually emerge much stronger, rather than tilt towards a camp which would be not in national interest, but in world bloc interest. Let me put it this way.
Okay, Ajay, General Harbhajan has another question. He said he's had a very illuminating talk by serving AVM in Chandigarh, and who talked about the Russian use of armed helicopters extensively, but they suffered heavy losses. And this is mainly due to US and NATO giving shoulder fire and other anti-aircraft weaponry to Ukraine.
Correct.
The Russian Air Force has had to operate from far off and beyond the battle line. So can you throw some light on this?
Yes, that's very true, because one of the thing is, like I said, the information we get is all from external sources. But one thing which struck me very much was when the Ukrainians launched their counteroffensive in the northeast, the Russians had responded immediately by sending the attack hepters to blunt the armored thrusts. On the first day of the offensive, 3 Russian attack helicopters were shot down by manpads, by handheld Stinger missiles, and the Russian attack hepters were unable to interfere with the mechanized operations thereafter. Remember, when they also launched the attack, first day of the war, that we've seen on the videos, on YouTube itself, when they attacked Hostomel, the first flight was 17 helicopters, 3 of them were shot down. Later on, the air defense has only increased, and perhaps because of the proliferation of handheld missiles is why the attack hepters have not been so effective. I'm also seeing one more very good question coming from Akshay Singh, who is my brother, who is asking, what is
America's role? Yeah, I was coming. But before that, Ajay, Commander Anil Jai Singh said, contrary to your thing pushing for unmanned vehicles, he said unmanned and autonomous technologies are the future. But in the foreseeable future, there will be effective force multipliers, not replace manned platforms.
I totally agree with you, Komodo Ajay. Ajay, sir, you're absolutely right in this. You can never replace the soldier, but you can give him a tool that enhances his capabilities. And the best tool at this point of time is drones, which is a platform that can be filled with so much technology, artificial intelligence, futuristic technologies, miniaturization, you name it, that will make the effectiveness of the soldier far more. But nothing can replace the soldier or the person on ground.
Okay, Ajay, now you must take on Akshay's question.
America's
role in the war.
America's role in the war actually began. We have to go back into here. I'm a historian, so I like to go into the historical perspective. There are 2 things which have determined the action. One is their, I wouldn't say withdrawal, but their rather humiliating retreat in disarray from Afghanistan last year. Their prestige as a world power was rock bottom. The other was the personal chemistry shared between Joe Biden and Putin. As you know, Putin was accused of rigging the US elections to enable his rival, Donald Trump, to win it. And personally, there was animosity between the world leaders, which do have a bearing in world affairs. So the stance which the US has taken, in many ways, one, it is to reassert US position back in Europe, show itself once again to be a leader in world affairs and regain the position it lost after Afghanistan. Also, it has got a glorious opportunity now to fight the Russian and weaken it till the last Ukrainian. A low-cost option in which weaponry has been given to Ukraine, intel information, very, very important, has been given out to them. Without a single body bag, they are able to assert their position in Europe once again. Not to forget the fact that the arms industry are going to make a killing at the end of it all.
Yeah, thanks, Ajay. There's a question from Group Captain Narang. He's asked, who has the ownership of Rustam 1, Tapas, and the UCAV programs?
I'm really afraid, but this is a question I don't know it. So I would not like to hazard a guess onto that.
I think we should skip that. Yes, thank you.
Okay, Ajay. I think the last question I have before, we call it a day is, what are the implications of this conflict as far as India is concerned? With the growing closeness between China over the Ukrainian conflict, and how will that affect our relations? And
with
how
China?
will that affect?
Okay, See, with China, if you take even recently, Putin and Xi Jinping had an 8-minute conversation in which they both talked about support for each other. But you take a look at it, neither China, the way the war is spanning, had Russia attained its gains rapidly, it would have actually emboldened China to push a similar agenda in Taiwan and in Ladakh and against India as well. In fact, in one of the chapters of my book, which I call the Doomsday Scenario, I bring up the scenario in which China is emboldened to attack Taiwan, and it leads to a global conflict akin to World War II, in which Germany and Japan fought against the rest of the world. But the very fact that Russia has been held back, the West has still stood firm in spite of all the rifts they had in between, may actually be a little bit of a dampener. And as far as India and Russian relationship goes, yes, Russia and China getting close, and Russia is the weaker, I wouldn't say the weaker partner, I would say the smaller partner in the relationship. Its economy is 1/3 that of China. It is more and more dependent upon China. So that unstinting Russian support, which one had got over the years, may not be forthcoming. But otherwise, I think against China, yeah, we are holding our own, both militarily and politically, diplomatically and economically. And I think that will continue.
Yeah, thanks, Ajay. You had a complete chapter on this Xi Putin tango.
Tango, yes, I
Yeah,
call it
and
tango.
you said, I remember correctly, you said the friendship between Russia and China has no limits. And you quoted the meeting between Putin and President Xi of Feb 2022. Yeah.
Correct.
So I think that's been sir, I think we're running out of time. And I think this has been a fantastic, discussion of your book, Ajay. You've given everybody a great insight into this wonderful book, and I'm sure most of the people who've been listening to this would have already read the book. And we've had some wonderful questions by the participants, very deep questions. And I once again take this opportunity to thank Lieutenant General Gautam Murthy for giving me this, unique privilege to host this show, sir. Thank you very much. And I thank all members of CASA also. Yeah, deeply honored, sir. I'm grateful to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, both of you, Colonel Ajay Singh and General Jagatbir Singh, for this very, very fascinating discussion. I really do not know how time has flown by. You've covered the entire gamut of your book and the entire aspects of all these operations you've brought to the fore, including the maritime ops and the air ops. When you said in the beginning that how Russia reeled back their armor thrust to Kyiv and what actually prompted them to do so, and how the fate of Ukraine hung in the balance in the first few days of the war, with the West asking Zelensky to leave, and he stood firm there in his combat T-shirt, in the dress that he's been seen ever since. Rallied his people around and fought back valiantly. Where this war went, well, you have hazarded a guess. And I think from this thing, you painted all the three scenarios. But from the likes of it, there's no war, no peace kind of a scenario is likely to persist for some time now. And well, as Jagatbir has said, maybe you could be looking at a sequel to your book, updating your book in a few months now. We shall see. But right now, as you said, martial winter has set in. And despite a few forays, not much is heard. It's being pushed out of the headlines. Geopolitics is dominating today, but I'm sure the military action will soon begin when both sides sort of take this winter pause to rearm and re-equip themselves. Thank you very much for this fascinating overview. I thank Ms. Barnali, our IT hand, our IT expert, who has put this webinar, this discussion together. And thank you all the participants and for participating today in today's webinar. It's been a fascinating discussion. Thank you, Ajay. Thank you, Jagatbir. Jai Hind and God bless. Happy New Year once again to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.